I am here with Dr. Bruce Stevens, who is going to talk with us about his book, Before Belief Discovering First Spiritual Awareness. Hi, Dr. Stevens. Welcome.
Hi, Sahar. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks. Would you like to just start off with a brief introduction of your book, Before Belief?
Yes, Before Belief was the culmination of a 5-year gig as a research professor, which every academic's dream, really. And I had 5 years. So basically it led up to that. And it's by far the most important work I've written. But the irony is that it came out in February 2020 when COVID hit the world. So I think it was largely unnoticed for reasons of a plague descending on the planet. So, in my total frustration, I bought 50 copies myself and sent it to major libraries in the hope that someone might read it someday. So, this is one of the first responses to the book. So, I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you very much, Sohar.
It's my pleasure to ask you more about the book. I want to start with this idea of a spiritual sense. Lots of people know about visual sense, like your eyes, but what is your spiritual sense?
Well, that's actually an interesting point. The medievals actually had the idea of a spiritual sense, and you see it in those glorious tapestries in Paris, where one of the unicorns represents it. I'm not 100% sure. I think it is whether it's just simply one of Aristotle's 5 basic senses, simply attuned to the transcendence. I'd probably go that way. So, but I think that a spiritual sense is based on a felt sense. Now, give you an illustration of that. When you look at something like self-esteem, people have a felt sense that they're worthwhile or worthless. Now, that's a felt sense. It's not a cognitive. There's no basic logic of that. There's nothing that says one person's a good person, one person's a bad person. But experiences in childhood, or basically as an infant, leads to a felt sense of being worthwhile or worthless. And so it's that sort of thing that I think is fundamental to earliest spiritual awareness, which is in fact before language, before cognitive processes. So this is what's essential to actually appreciate. And so far, our models like Fowler's development of faith, Kohlberg's moral development, really start with language and cognition at about 3 years old. I've said, what is the experience of being in the womb? What is the experience of being 3 months old, or the birth experience? How does that affect our sense of the transcendence, or I know your area is epistemology, how does it affect what we know? And the odd thing, say, for example, with rigid religious belief, is that it's often learnt early, it's often passively learnt, and it feels true. So the fact that it feels true points to an early assumption of a belief. And of course, it can be quite rigid and resistant to any form of argument, no matter how sophisticated, from a philosopher or a theologian.
So after the person is born, there's some kind of spiritual awareness, and that spiritual awareness happens before the cognitive understanding. And you say in your book, you explain how that spiritual awareness is the foundation of our relationship with God. Can you say more about that now?
Sure. A spiritual sense is, well, I actually would say it's probably in the womb. Imagine a refugee mother trying to enter, say, the States or escape Africa and get to Italy or something like that. Now, the anxiety in the backdrop of maybe being way held by pirates or something. I mean, just imagine the experience of an infant in the womb, or a child, the embryo in the womb. There'd be such a background anxiety to this sense of the world. Now, once you're born, though, let's say you're in a church-going family. Well, you would go to, you might hear music at church, happy music, or the organs playing, or choirs. You might have a sense of baptism, the baptism experience of being welcomed into the church. Maybe the congregation claps and a lot of people kiss you or whatever they do. So all of these experiences go in the mix, I would suggest. And so they can be fundamental, but equally, let's say you've got a heroin addicted parents who are neglectful or inattentive. Well, all of this will form part of the data for an understanding of God, for example, or transcendence. So God becomes, in the case of neglect, unreliable. In the case of a healthy family, much more available in a healthy way and not abusive or so I mean, all of this stuff is so fundamental and so important that I think it's vital for us to take into account anything from philosophy or psychological development or spirituality.
And I hope you can help explain this transcendence in your phrase precognitive human experience of transcendence. What is that really?
The transcendence or the precognitive or the,
All of
what do
it.
you want? All of it, okay. Well, we learn through a mechanism that psychology has developed called implicit learning. So if you do Psych 101, part of it will be Arthur Reber's work on implicit learning. Now, basically, it's learning without words. Just think for a sec. You learned to ride a bicycle. Can you describe how you learned, or how would you describe to someone else learning to ride a bicycle? It just doesn't work because it's implicit learning, and implicit learning can extend throughout the whole lifespan. I mean, we learn lots of things implicitly. So I've just simply taken that, which is natural to an infant, and extended it through the lifespan and said that I've talked about precognitive or learning without words, which is, as you've put on your card, implicit learning. And I think it's relevant for adult learning. So therefore, one of the things we can do with this is to try and challenge ourselves or find ways to put it into words. We've already learnt it, so put it into words. And so there's various mechanisms in psychology to explore this, from Freudian slips to dream interpretation of Jung. And I've also made some suggestions in the books about how we can do this through sentence completion. When I did sentence completion on myself with God, I said God is, and I said distant. So for me, God is slightly distant or over there, I think I said. So he's not, so I have a sense of distance. Now, that is actually putting into words my pre-learning, you see. And that's a wonderful thing to actually start to explore about ourselves as a foundation for our spiritual development. Another way we can look at this is attachment theory, which is actually a precognitive mechanism which has been applied by some authors in the Christian world to our relationship to God. So they take a relationship with parents, which is attachment or secure or insecure, and look at the implications. And I've done the same. It's a similar. I'm arguing the mechanism is implicit learning as well, and it applies equally to God as it does to father or mother.
So I wonder what a difference this would make, finding that somebody has a better or worse spiritual awareness, then they have a stronger or weaker relationship with God. What could a parent of a young child do to improve that child's relationship with God, given that there's a spiritual awareness that they could help them learn? Or can a parent help a child learn that awareness?
Look, I think it's secondary by implication. I mean, the best thing a parent can probably do to help a child's relationship to God is to improve their relationship with the child. So that's primary. I think Freud got that right. So the relationship to the parent is fundamental. So something they could do this work in, I know around the world, in circle of security, where parents actually learn healthier attachment to their children. And I think that by that stage, I mean, the child's not going to have much awareness of God as a cognitive concept until quite a lot older. But the relationship with mother or father is absolutely fundamental and essential. So if that can be improved, the later on relationship with God is less contaminated. I think that's a better way to look at it. So if it's contaminated, it becomes more fundamentally unhealthy. And you have to have a significant unlearning process, which of course would involve bringing the awareness or the felt sense into words, articulate it, bring it into a cognitive concept like I have a contaminated view of God, and then say, how can I develop a healthier view of God? You might taking off those contaminations in some way or becoming more clean of those sort of attachments.
Can we teach other people a spiritual awareness?
Look, I think it's more like learning meditation. I think it's more awareness. For example, I've often puzzled, why do I find it easy to believe in God and someone else doesn't find it easy to believe in God?
Right.
I mean, that's such a fundamental question. And I think it's actually close to an aesthetic awareness, which is a different kind of view. I think Keats said beauty and truth are synonymous. And I think that for me, you see the world, and if you have a religious perspective, what you see demands explanation. But if you see the world and it just is, or it's an accident, it doesn't require any explanation. But so to me, the world, when I see it, invites me to journey towards meaning for why what is. And I think that the actual appreciation of the spiritual awareness is more closer to, I mean, you can look at a Jackson Pollock and some people just see drips. Others see a dynamic, glorious expression of abstract expressionism. Well, I'm more of the latter category. I think that Jackson Pollock's a magnificent, or Mark Rothko, a magnificent artist. And I think I just see it, I feel it. And I think that's similar to seeing or feeling a vacuum or a need for God, or something that transcendence that fills that space. I mean, you stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon. I mean, who doesn't feel awe? And I think that invites us really to say, who or what did this, created this? How am I a part of it? And what accountability do I have in life to live a better life or live my best life? And I think those are the fundamental questions. And I think they do relate to that experience in the womb, experience of birth, experience of nurture, or whatever.
My last direct question is about unconscious spiritual learning. Is unconscious spiritual learning something that continues your whole life? Some people talk about lifelong learning. Does this unconscious spiritual learning happen until we die?
I would say absolutely. I would say yes. It is a lifelong journey. And I think we first learn in this implicit way, this unconsciously. Later on, we learn cognitively or through language. We sit in lectures and someone explains something to us, a la your students, your 200 students. They sit and listen to you and they learn philosophy that way. But those two, we've got a parallel process. We've got two processes of learning. As adults, we tend to rely on one, not the other. So we've lost our being in touch with unconscious learning. And that's actually to our enormous, loss of benefit, really. We've
I
totally,
see.
you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes,
It
yes.
really is.
So
We've cut off our learning. We've truncated it.
so
And so
there's
we
this
really,
conscious learning and then there's unconscious learning, and they're happening or could be happening at the same time forever.
exactly. And we just
Beautiful.
need to reclaim it and find ways to reclaim it and to integrate the two, to bring the two together, which I think in your work in philosophy is very similar.
Yes. My last question is this. It's a pretty general one. Is there anything that you didn't put in your book beyond belief that you wish you did?
Oh, that's a really great question. And to be honest, it's the first time I've thought of it, because I've just felt this enormous frustration, really, of producing a book that coincided with COVID and the absolute disaster of the book. And of course, there's, anyway, so that happened. Look, and also when you give a book, you write a book. I've written 10 or 12 or 13, I've lost count. I can only imagine, I'm using a female metaphor, giving birth to an elephant, writing a PhD thesis, you would certainly understand. And you
Yes.
feel nauseous at the thought of it, really. You've done this work, you've done all the proofreading, you've done all the production of it. You frankly don't want to think about it. So, there's a period of time in which, and I'm not sure I've emerged on the other end of not wanting to think about it.
Beautiful. Well, Dr. Bruce Stevens, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sahar. Much appreciated. Great opportunity. Thank you.